big welcome to Dr. Jennifer Margulis. So Dr. Jennifer Margulis is an award-winning investigative and science journalist with articles that have appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, Smithsonian Magazine, and dozens of other magazines, newspapers, and online sites. She's best known as a health advocate who promotes education, medical freedom, and safer medicine. And Jennifer's book, The Vaccine-Friendly Plan, is a bestseller on Amazon. And I wanted to, I wanted to let you know, last night we had a little talk at dinner, and I said, well, you're an activist, and then you kind of said, well, yeah, I guess I am. I hope you feel more comfortable now seeing the rest of these guys that, yeah, you're an activist and ready to go. One other thing too, when I heard your interview on the radio not too long ago, I'd heard for the first time the word microbiome. And I just want to let you know that this past week I heard it twice in 2 other locations. I'm like, here we go, you know, so good seed planting there.
Thanks, Joel.
Jennifer.
Thank you for spending your Saturday afternoon with us. So when my oldest daughter was born, we lived in Greenfield, Massachusetts, and we went to the Greenfield Public Library. And there was a lady there named Mrs. Sally Ahern, and Sally Ahern would teach us she would read to us, and she would teach us little pearls of parenting wisdom. And one of the songs that she taught us was a song that you would sing to a child, with a child, when you washed your hands. So it went like this. This little hand is a good little hand. This little hand is her brother. But she was from Boston, so she said, brother. Together they wash and they wash and they wash. Together they wash each other. So the idea behind that is that you put your hands under the faucet and you wash them and you sing that little ditty, or in the case of my toddler, you belt it out at the top of your lungs. And that this is, of course, good parenting, because we have to be as hygienic as possible. It's very important to have good hygiene, and we have to teach our children to wash their hands, right? That's just sort of a basic tenet of public health. And many of you, I think, have spent some time in the third world, and in the developing world, forgive me, and you've seen what happens when you don't have a hygienic situation. This is a sea star from Kenya, if you're wondering about the slide. Here is a street scene from Rajasthan. I lived and worked in West Africa, in Niger, which was at the time considered one of the poorest countries in the world. And we had a lot of what you see there. You see garbage on the street, and you see open sewers with fetid water coming out. And again, not having good hygiene is a huge problem. And you can remember that this isn't something that is unique to the developing world. It used to be that in the United States, we had huge hygiene problems. You remember when they introduced the Model T Ford in New York City, people thought this was going to solve the problems in New York because there were huge piles of horse manure on the streets that attracted flies, and New York City was incredibly dirty. So the thinking was that these new cars would actually clean up the streets. This is a picture of a 5-year-old shrimp picker from Mississippi, and you can see that he's barefoot and that he's absolutely filthy. This is from 1911, but of course, this was still happening and continues to happen. Think of the image of Flint, Michigan with the brown water coming out of the tap. So who knows who took this picture? Who said it? This one is Dorothea Lange. Yes, is that what you said? Yes, okay. So this was taken actually right here in Siskiyou County in California, and I don't know if you can tell from the slide, but you see that these kids are really, really dirty. So it's so important to have good health and good hygiene, and we started very specifically campaigning in favor of hygiene in the 1940s and the early 1950s, and there were documentary films made that would be targeted at young people about body care and grooming and teaching people it's really important to brush your teeth, it's really important to wash your hair, it's really important to wash your hands. And these kind of documentaries propaganda films, if you could say, would be shown on television and they would be shown in the schools, and now it's sort of such a basic tenet that, you know, it just seems totally obvious to everyone. But it wasn't always obvious that we needed to have good hygiene. This is Ignacio Semmelweis, who some of you may recognize. Now, he was a doctor who worked in clinics. He was born in Hungary, and he noticed that there was a terrible problem when he was delivering babies, is that there was such a high maternal mortality rates in that so many women would come into the hospital to have their baby delivered, and they would die of childbed fever. And what Semmelweis figured out was that a lot of the students and some of the other doctors would be coming from a previous childbirth, or they would be coming from an autopsy. They wouldn't wash their hands, and then they would go to deliver a baby, and often they would really be getting right up there with the woman, and that he didn't know what it was, but he understood that there was something something on these doctors and these students' hands was making them was contaminating the women, so that women who were dying of childbed fever were not, it was something that they were actually getting from the doctors. And so he did something absolutely, totally radical for his time. He told the midwives that he worked with that they needed to wash their hands. And they would wash them in a lime, a kind of a caustic lime solution. And what ended up happening was absolutely phenomenal. We saw an unbelievable decline in the maternal mortality rates. So where it used to be kind of normal that women would come in and so many women would end up actually dying in childbirth because of or afterwards, we saw this huge drop in death based on childbirth. And he said he didn't know what it was, but he knew something was causing this. And so he started speaking out about it, and he started writing about it, and he wrote a book which was published, I believe, in 1860. And the book basically presented all of his data, all of his facts, all of his statistics. And what you have to know about Ignacio Semmelweis is that he was the laughing stock of the medical community. So there was a doctor who said, gentlemen's hands don't get dirty. There was the head of it was the Vienna Weekly, let me tell you what the name of that journal was called. It was the Vienna Medical Weekly, and this editor, he wrote, "It's time to stop the nonsense about chlorine hand wash." 5 years later, Ignacio Semmelweis had a mental breakdown, and he died in a mental institution. And when he died, he was literally the laughing stock of the medical community. Now it's hard to imagine that something like that could be so unaccepted at the time because it's such a basic tenet. But here's the thing. So we know that hygiene is incredibly important, and we know that we need to teach kids, Mrs. Ahern was right, we need to teach kids to wash their hands. But we also know increasingly that there's something good about being dirty. So now I'm going to ask you to tell me, what are the benefits of playing in the dirt? I'm going to use a different marker. You're going to have to talk really loud because it's hard to hear you and I can't see anyone. So tell me what's good about playing in the dirt. Okay, thank you. Somebody said it's fun. What else?
Builds immunity.
It builds immunity. Okay, excellent. What else? This is very important. It feels good. Feels good. Grounding, thank you. It connects us to nature. Thank you. Okay, we're going to get to that too. Connects us to nature. Wait, somebody said before the microbes, somebody said creative. Oh my God, you are so smart, all of you. Creative. It actually increases your serotonin levels. Serotonin levels, but then, and then it exposes us to microbes, right? Did we forget anything?
Teaches us that the world is beautiful.
Okay, it gives us an appreciation for beauty and gunk, yeah? And the beauty in gunk.
It also pulls toxins.
Exfoliating.
Somebody over here said exfoliating, and somebody is saying something about Okay, so can you say more about that? Oh, right, yes. Okay, so we can say that it takes toxins. Actually, that's sort of the exfoliating things, right? Out of your body, potentially. But someone else said, of course, it has to be good dirt, right? This is an important point, very, very important point. So we know that the typical human probably harbors something like 90 trillion microbes. And the very fact that you have so many microbes of so many different kinds is what keeps us healthy most of the time. So we actually need to encourage our children to play in the dirt. And as someone said, I don't know where, because I can't see any of you, I'm sorry. But we actually have a study that shows that playing in the dirt increases your serotonin levels. It makes you feel better. It works on your brain chemistry. We think that the reason for that is that there's a beneficial microbe in the soil that's been linked to feelings of well-being. We also know, and this isn't on here, that it decreases your chance of having a heart attack later in life. Have you ever heard this? This is so fascinating. Decreases your chance of heart attack. So basically what it means is that I'm simplifying some complicated science that has shown that you have decreased levels of stress and inflammation markers that are associated with heart attacks. So I'm making this a little bit more simplistic than it actually probably is. But there's a correlation between time spent in the mud and the dirt and playing with microbes and less risk of heart attack later in life. And I would put to you that it doesn't, we think about that with kids, right? But why should it stop with children? What about grown-ups? We also need to be doing these things. It's not like magically the benefits go away.
One more thing first. If it's warm enough to play in the sun, you're probably getting vitamin D.
Thank you. That was actually on my list of things I was hoping somebody would say. So outdoor time and vitamin D, right? Outdoor time. And we're gonna come back to that about vitamin D in a minute. Very, very, very important. So could I have somebody read this slide for me? I think I had a volunteer over there. You have to wait till they turn on the microphone and then put the microphone right up to your head. Like eat it.
Testing.
There you
Cool.
go.
Children should go barefoot in the dirt, play in the dirt, and not have to wash hands when they come in to eat.
Okay, so this wasn't a fringe hippie granola eater who said this. This was Joel Weinstock at MD, and this was quoted in the New York Times. So it says, children should go barefoot, they should play in the dirt, and they should not have to wash their hands when they come in to eat. Now, as a mother of 4 children who was listening to Mrs. Ahern, I find that advice a little bit confusing. And I just want you to hold that thought for a minute. So another major achievement of the 20th century, of course, is antibiotics. We know that since the age of antibiotics or the era of antibiotics that we've made tremendous advances in treating infectious diseases and and decreasing mortality rates in the United States and everywhere else. So do you know the story of how penicillin was discovered? You've probably heard it before, but Alexander Fleming was he worked in London. He was the son of a Scottish farmer, and he became a doctor and a scientific researcher, and he was a little bit of a disorganized, kind of a messy guy. So before he went on vacation, he threw all his petri dishes in the sink, and they were all growing bacteria, and he went away. And he came back from his holiday he worked at St. Mary's College in London. He came back from his holiday, and he looked at his petri dishes, and he had to throw them into a cleaning solution. And as he was looking at them, they're all sort of spotted with this, with bacteria. And he noticed that one of them, this was in 1928, September 3rd, a fateful day. And he noticed that, lo and behold, there was one petri dish that there was a big blob in the middle of mold, and there were no bacteria, there were no spores, there was no bacteria growing in that petri dish. So something about the mold that had started to spontaneously grow there was keeping the bacteria in check. And that was where we date the discovery of our modern day antibiotics. He didn't know, again, what it was, but he knew that there's something in this mold juice that could keep the antibiotics away, which was a pretty fascinating discovery for the time. And we know that antibiotics have helped with a range of things, including treating streptococcus and meningococcus and diphtheria, major illnesses of the time that were causing huge problems. So this is absolutely fantastic. This is a huge advance in modern medicine that is credited with saving so many lives. But again, there's a rub. And you all have heard about this because it's something that has been talked about for so many years now. But because we got so enthusiastic about antibiotics, we started prescribing them, first of all, when they were not needed and when the body could clear its infection by itself if you had a healthy immune system. But also, you go into the doctor's office because you have a cough or you have a viral infection, and because people love this new miracle wonder drug, and so the doctor gives you antibiotics. And for a viral infection that antibiotics can do nothing against. So what? You take a few antibiotics. Well, it turns out that there is a huge downside to exposing humans to antibiotics, and especially to overexposing or over-treating with antibiotics. And the most obvious problem there is one that you've all heard about, which is that we've created these antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So that means that because we take antibiotics so much for so many things that don't really matter, when we create superbugs, because we're always in a process of evolution. Our bacteria is evolving, humans are evolving. It's not like evolution happened and then it just kind of magically stopped, right? And bacteria regenerate themselves so quickly that they're always constantly fighting and evolving and changing, and we've developed these antibiotic-resistant superbugs. So this is MRSA killed her baby, and the mother is spreading the word about it. This was an article from last year. Her baby died in 2004. You can see that picture of that very healthy-looking toddler who had been breastfed, who had all his vaccines, and then who died of MRSA. And then here's another case where a staph infection causes a boy's death. This was a 7th grader in New York City. But these are not isolated cases, and this is what I want you all to know. It's very important. And could I have you read this slide for us, please? Oh, so we have to turn it on, sorry. I know they'll turn it on for you.
Testing.
Thank you.
Each year in the United States, at least 2 million people become infected with bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics, and at least 23,000 people die each year as a direct result of these infections. Many more die from other conditions complicated by an antibiotic-resistant infection.
Okay, so here we've got a problem. We have an absolute miracle of modern medicine that really helps us in a variety of situations, and then we have at least 23,000 people dying each year in the United States, direct result of antibiotic-resistant infections. And, again, this is we have a dichotomy that we have to figure out how to resolve. Now, one of the other problems with antibiotics is that probably most of the people in this room, actually not because this is such an interesting and enlightened crowd, but I consider myself human. Most of you probably think of yourselves as humans. Is that right, more or less? No? No. So usually most of the time. But the thing is that, and you see me up here probably as human, but the thing is that we actually are not human. We are walking ecosystems. And I'm so glad that Joel said that he had not heard the word microbiome before, because it's good to be able to tell people things that they don't already know. Like Deborah Gordon, who's a doctor in town who's sitting in the audience, knows all of this backwards and forwards, and she should be up on the stage. So, but we actually, so some people call it our microbiome. You've heard that word before. Other scientists call it our biome. And the reason why they use the word biome is that, we co-evolved to live with bacteria, viruses, and worms. There's some interesting research that shows that we even have water bears, that some people have water bears. Those are those microscopic animals that look like little tiny bears in our tear ducts. And so not only do we have bacteria living in us and on us all over the place, especially in our reproductive system, especially in our digestive system, but we actually, the animal cells in our body, the human cells in our body, we know now that one of the organelles from our human cells used to be a free-living microorganism. So which organelle is that? You all know already, the mitochondria. So our mitochondria are actually bacterial. 90% of the cells in our body are bacterial, and then 10% of them are human. We've identified at least 10,000 different species. There's probably so many more that we don't know. Those are just the ones that we've actually named and can identify. So one of the things that we have to think about whenever we're thinking about health, we have to think about how anything that we're doing, whether it's hygiene or antibiotics, not only affects ourselves as humans, but how it affects our biome and our microbiome, which brings me to the issue of vaccines. So when I was 29 years old, I had my first child. She's in the audience today. I didn't know she was going to be here. And I think when you have a baby, you are meeting someone for the first time who somehow you've always known for your entire life. And the thing that you want most in the world is just to hold that baby close to you and protect that baby. It's like this unbelievable miracle that humans can know how to grow other humans, and that we don't have to have an instruction manual, I think is pretty amazing. My daughter was born at Crawford Long Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, and a few minutes after she was born, it was a really hard labor. It took about 22 hours. A nurse came up to me and she said, okay, it's time for your hepatitis. It's time for her hepatitis B vaccine. And the only thing I wanted in the world was to protect that baby. And I had been completely vaccinated as a child, and I had been revaccinated when I was in my 20s because I went to live and work in Niger in 1992 for the first time. And I absolutely had no question that I was going to vaccinate. But I was a very educated person, and I was in a monogamous relationship for 3 years. I was married to my husband. I knew that I was hepatitis B negative, and I knew my husband was too. I knew that no caregiver who my daughter came in contact with had hepatitis B, and I knew that hepatitis B is a virus that's mainly spread through sexual contact, sharing needles, and contaminated blood. I also knew that hepatitis B is not spread through food or water, eating utensils, breastfeeding, hugging, kissing, hand-holding, coughing, or sneezing. That's all information directly from the CDC. So I just wasn't sure why I should do a hepatitis B shot for my daughter. And when I said to the nurse, I just want a little time to figure this out, I'm going to ask my pediatrician. And the nurse narrowed her eyes in fury. She was so upset with me. Like I had said something so antithetical to her worldview and to what was right. And the last thing you want to do when you've just had a baby is make anyone mad at you. You're so vulnerable. You've got so many hormones going through your body. And I was really surprised at this reaction. But I held that child close to me and I stuck to my guns. So 2 weeks later, we took my daughter to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician looks, and my husband and I were both like, gosh, we're not sure, we're really sorry. We didn't do this thing, and we just want to talk to you about it. We felt like we were kind of like confessing that we hadn't done our homework. And the doctor kind of tossed off her shoulder really nonchalantly, and she said, oh, it's a good thing you didn't do that. Hepatitis B has been counterindicated in newborns. And my husband turned white as a sheet. My face froze. And I thought, how would I have felt if I actually had done it? And now she's telling me it's been counterindicated in newborns. I did not understand what had happened in that situation until many, many, many years later. But what I did understand at that moment was that it was my responsibility to really look critically and to educate myself about vaccines. Because what I had taken for granted as someone who was fully vaccinated and who always thought that vaccines were, sort of just 100% where they were, and we always do them, what I realized at that moment was that some of the recommendations that I was being given were in the process of changing, and that finally the buck was going to stop with me in terms of my daughter's health. So let me explain why that doctor said that. In 1999, in July of 1999, when that child was born, it turned out that the CDC had never counted up the cumulative amount of mercury, it's called thimerosal. It's a mercury-based preservative that was put into the vaccines, and it was in several of the childhood vaccinations, including the hepatitis B shot at that time. There is no mercury now in the hepatitis B shot that's still given to newborns. And because they had never counted up the cumulative effect of it, they decided, just to be cautious, that for a while they would suspend hepatitis B, and then they instituted a voluntary phase out of the mercury. So mercury has been phased out from all of the childhood vaccinations except for the multi-dose flu shot and the single tetanus shot. Those two shots still contain mercury. Now, the problem is there's another issue with hepatitis B, which is that so now the hepatitis B shot given at birth contains 250 micrograms of aluminum. Now, that's a tiny amount. That's such an unbelievably minuscule amount, and we know that the dose makes the poison. We also know that that aluminum, like mercury, is highly, highly neurotoxic. The reason why there's those 3 cans there is that I just want you to think about, if you take those aluminum cans and you grind them up, if you see, if you grind up aluminum cans and you make them into a fine, 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 fine dust, so fine you can barely see it, and then you inject that intramuscularly into a child who's just been born, who weighs 7 pounds, that yes, it's a very, very small amount, but any amount of something that is highly neurotoxic, I think, is highly suspect. The problem with the question now is that are we making the same mistake with aluminum that we were making with mercury? Because not only is there mercury in the hepatitis B shot, but there's also mercury in at least one of the brands of vitamin K. That's another intervention that is given to children at birth. Now, this is a question. At what rate would aluminum be toxic? And this is something that we actually have some information on. So I did want someone to read this. Do you mind reading some more? We might screw them up if we do it again, but yes, thank you.
Research indicates that patients with impaired kidney function, including premature neonates who receive parenteral levels of aluminum at greater than 4 to 5 micrograms per kilogram per day, accumulate aluminum at levels associated with central nervous system and bone toxicity. Tissue loading may occur at even lower rates of administration.
Okay, so the FDA gives us these guidelines. That complicated word parenteral means intravenous or intramuscular. And what we know, we've only done the studies on premature babies, but what we know is that if we give more than 4 to 5 micrograms per kilogram per day, that has been definitively associated with neurotoxicity. And the problem is that the average newborn weighs what? How many kilograms? For argument's sake, let's say 5 kilograms? 4. Okay, 4 or 5 kilograms, that's a really big baby, right? Because that's about 10 pounds. So we are giving at least 10 times the amount of oh my God, I keep doing that, of aluminum that we know to be safe to a tiny little baby. And then there's the question of accumulation. So we are asking pregnant women now to get 3 vaccines, well, up to 3 vaccines. We are giving them a vaccine against tetanus, diphtheria, and acellular pertussis, and then we're also giving them a flu shot. So if your pregnancy spans more than one flu season, you're going to get the shot in the first trimester, and then you might get it in the 3rd trimester. But the problem is, so these are the 2 Tdaps that are given to pregnant women. So that one contains 330 micrograms of aluminum, and the other contains 250 micrograms of aluminum. So children before they're born and then right at birth are being exposed to a huge amount of aluminum, and this is something that doctors across America are starting to be concerned about. And then we have aluminum that's present in all of these other vaccines. That's all from the CDC. So we know that the dose makes the poison, but we also know that if you can effectively flush something out of your body, it doesn't matter what you're exposed to. My grandfather smoked like a chimney and drank like a fish, and he didn't have a cough when he died at age 89, right? He was somebody who was really good at clearing tobacco and alcohol from his system. But we also know that there are certain things that can compromise our body's ability to detoxify, and one of those things is acetaminophen. Acetaminophen is the main ingredient in children's Tylenol, and I had to, and it's something that is given, so we give, sorry, I'll go back to, if I can figure out how, we'll go back to that slide for a second. So we recommend, we give Tylenol to moms in the hospital. We give Tylenol to children when we're doing a circumcision. So if a baby has just had a circumcision, we're going to recommend that they get Tylenol. If the baby has a fever from the vaccine, we're going to recommend that they give Tylenol. So what's the problem with Tylenol? This is absolutely brand new research that came out last week. I was changing my slides last night. One of the problems is that what we know about acetaminophen is that it basically, the easy way to explain it is that it impairs your body's ability to detoxify. So it depletes your body of an enzyme called glutathione. Glutathione is sort of nature's mop. This is what you need to bind with the aluminum to take it out of your system. As long as it's inert and it's not being loaded into your tissues, there's no problem. But the problem is that we know, especially in the presence of testosterone, that acetaminophen can make it so your body cannot successfully detoxify. And the problem there, a group of scientists has published a paper this week. It's a review article of all of the existing science, and one of the things that this group, so they're from Harvard University and Duke University, and there's, I can't remember how many, 7 or 8 scientists. The lead author on this study is a guy named William Parker, and what they say is one explanation for the increased prevalence of autism is that increased exposure to acetaminophen exacerbated by inflammation and oxidative stress is neurotoxic in babies and small children. So the problem is, the way that I like to say it is that, sorry, going back to this, so we have to ask this question, just like with hygiene and just like with antibiotics, whenever we do something, we have to ask these questions. Are the vaccines that we're giving necessary? Are they? So in the case of hepatitis B, in my particular family, I made the right decision not to do that vaccine. If I had a caregiver who was hepatitis B positive, or my co-author who's a pediatrician in Portland recently gave a child a hepatitis B shot because the dad was hepatitis B positive. It was very, very unlikely that that child would be getting hepatitis B, but in that case, that is an appropriate vaccine to give. So we always have to ask these questions. Are they necessary? Are they safe? And do the potential benefits to the person being vaccinated outweigh the potential harms? This is the issue with pregnancy, that we're giving 3 vaccines in pregnancy, but we have never shown that it is safe to give vaccines during pregnancy. We know that when you vaccinate a pregnant woman, you're causing an inflammatory response. That's part of what you do. That's part of what the vaccine does. And the issue there is that unborn babies are especially vulnerable to maternal inflammation, both to maternal illness and to toxicants. So I would put to you that we have to be particularly cautious when we make recommendations about doing interventions on healthy people with the idea that we're going to keep them healthier, because sometimes we run into trouble. So the problem with, there's good news and bad news about pregnancy. The good news about pregnancy is that the baby has the fetus, the mother's fetus, which is giving them nutrients, but also can sometimes give them toxins, but also can serve as a filter. And the baby also has the mother's liver. But when you take away the mother's liver and then you have a newborn and you start giving them all sorts of toxic exposures, not just vaccines, not just antibiotics, not just acetaminophen, but a lot. I'm sorry, I'm not saying that vaccines are toxic, but some of the ingredients in the vaccines is what I wanted to say. Then you start to wonder if you are creating health problems. So you may have seen this slide because it went very viral on the internet, but if you see the woman there, and there's probably some people in the audience who are of her age, 2 vaccines for that grandma to be fully vaccinated. The next woman is probably around my age. She had 7 vaccines to be considered fully vaccinated. And then her daughter, 14 vaccines. And then that little girl holding that with a pacifier in her mouth, 69 vaccines by age 18. So this is the question is, did we take something that's unquestionably good and useful? I am so grateful for vaccines. My children have been vaccinated against yellow fever, which is something that you wouldn't have your children vaccinated against because we lived and worked in West Africa. Have we taken something, my aunt who recently got a shingles shot, which was a good decision for her. I think that, thank God that we have this important medical tool in the toolbox. At the same time, Have we taken something that was unquestionably good and turned it into something that is becoming harmful? Well, the proof is in the pudding. If America's children were totally healthy, we wouldn't have to have any of these conversations. We wouldn't have to worry about exposure to toxins, and we wouldn't have to worry about exposure to vaccines, or we wouldn't have to worry that we were overexposing them to certain vaccines. But the truth is that chronic disease in the United States is on the rise. We're seeing unusually severe and early onset allergies, especially food allergies is a big one. We're seeing obesity, which people are thinking is connected to endocrine disruption. We are seeing type 1 juvenile diabetes, and we're seeing a ton more asthma than we've ever seen before. And of course, and you all know this already, but we are also seeing brain disorders of a higher function than we have ever seen before. So this is an old slide. We are in 2017 now. Probably the most accurate statistic is that we have 1 in 45 children is considered on the autism spectrum now. And you know, the issue here is that people say, oh, well, vaccines don't cause autism. Well, why are you talking about this? But we've been saying there's no conversation to have. Vaccines don't cause autism, and we've been saying that for 20 years, and we've been adding vaccines to the schedule, and we've been seeing the cases of autism rise. Correlation is not causation. Everybody in this room knows that. And this is it's not an easy conversation. There's not something simple. If you ask that team of researchers from Duke University and Harvard, they would say they actually think it's the acetaminophen given in association with vaccines. Of course, if you take away the vaccines and you take away the acetaminophen, you don't know which thing caused it or didn't cause it. But what we do know, what we can all agree on, is that our children are suffering from brain disorders that are environmentally induced, and we don't know why, but we have some good leads on what might be exacerbating or triggering or participating in this difficult situation. So in this case, I think it's very appropriate to evoke the precautionary principle. So the precautionary principle, I can't ask you to read anymore. I'll just read this. The precautionary principle is a wonderful, I think, rubric to think about these things. The idea is that if an action, a policy, or a medical intervention has a suspected risk of causing harm, so in that case, that could be the acetaminophen, that could be giving a newborn vaccine, the burden of proof that it is not harmful falls on the action, meaning that you don't take a healthy pregnant woman and recommend that she do things unless you really have proof that what you've recommended is safe. You evoke the precautionary principle. How much time do I have, Joel? 10 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story about two kids who got the chicken pox. First of all, how many people in this room have had the chicken pox? Raise your hand. Pretty much everyone. Has anybody not had the chicken pox in this room? Oh my goodness, interesting. Okay, a few people, maybe 5, 6, 7, 10 people. So more than 95% of the people in this room have had the chicken pox. So this is a true story, but the names are changed. One little boy, I'm going to call him Jack, got the chicken pox, and his mom and dad were not in alignment about what to do about vaccines. You know that we now have a vaccine against the chicken pox. Actually, some of you who are older might not know that that's something that we vaccinate against. It used to be a totally routine childhood illness, and now it's something that we've added to the schedule as a routine vaccine. And they hadn't gotten vaccinated, and this little boy got really sick. He got a really bad fever. He had lethargy. He had really painful, swollen, infected sores, especially on his tush. And he felt terrible, and it went on for a long time. And his mom actually felt really bad about it. And if she had known how difficult that disease was going to be for him, she said later when I interviewed her that she probably would have had him have a vaccine. She felt kind of bad about it. Now there's another little girl named Jill. They grew up in the same neighborhood, very similar. They're not siblings though. And Jill's mother really wanted her to get the chicken pox. So she did everything she could to expose her to the chicken pox. So she had some friends who were twins, and she brought her who had chicken pox, and they had active sores on their bodies. So she brought her over, put them in a room together, closed the doors, closed the windows, played together for 90 minutes, and now we know that chickenpox is very contagious, and you're really likely to get it after that. But that wasn't enough, so she had them. She couldn't dupe her daughter into sharing a lollipop with her friends who were sick, but they all had lollipops. They took the kids who had chickenpox took the lollipops, dipped them in water, and she had her daughter drink the chickenpox water. Her child did not get sick. So and didn't get the chickenpox, right? So here's my question. Why did Jack get so sick from the chickenpox, and why didn't Jill get sick? And I'm not asking this as a rhetorical question. I'd like to have your thoughts. What is it that makes one child, and both of the children were not vaccinated, what is it that makes one child's immune system really robust and makes another's not? You tell me. The problem is I can't. Okay, dirt. Exposure to dirt. What else? I'm glad you're paying attention. So good nutrition. What else? Did somebody say biome? Okay, so having a healthy biome, you all are so awesome, or a microbiome. And somebody else said breastfeeding, especially exclusive breastfeeding right from birth, right? We actually have a study. We know that this is more important even than access to clean drinking water and to vaccination. Breastfeeding is the #1 determination of lowering infant mortality rates. What else?
Epstein-Barr virus, what the child may or may not already have that.
Okay, so absolutely really important. So I want to say two things there, but so exposure to disease, right, is one, but then another is other diseases that a child. You want to say the Epstein-Barr virus specifically, but the bigger point there is that if you're sick with something else, your immune system is compromised, which is one of the reasons why doctors absolutely never would vaccinate a child who was sick or vaccinate a child who was on antibiotics. That protocol has changed in the United States, and a lot of people think that that might be one of the other reasons why we're seeing so many problems now with children not being able to tolerate the number of vaccines. But so other, what do you call it, comorbidities, but the presence of other diseases, let's say it that way. Okay, so other, right, infections, other infections that they may or may not have. What else? Unrecognized. So you want to say unrecognized, right? Okay, good point, excellent point, right? Jill might have already been exposed to the chickenpox, had such a mild case that she was immune for life, and we just don't know it. What else? Thank you, vitamin D. So we need to have enough vitamin D. What else?
Families just don't get sick.
Okay, so your genetic predisposition is huge, right? Genetics. My grandfather, with all that smoking, and died at 89. Okay, so exposure to toxins, absolutely. Exposure to endocrine disruptors and toxins and to GMO. So I'm putting that in the GMO category. But let's just say, is it okay if I say it that way? Exposure to toxins. What else? There's a couple other ones. What? Okay, so your mindset. Oh, that might have been it. Very stubborn child, absolutely not going to get those chickenpox. That's something. That's true. In the interest of time, because I'm running out, I'm going to say a few more. We know that stress has a huge, huge impact on the immune system. We have a lot of good data now that shows that people who are stressed, that kind of goes with the mindset a little bit maybe, but that people who are stressed are much more likely to get sick. And we also know that how do you put this down? Okay, yes, absolutely. We've got that up here, good nutrition, but we can just put it down because it's so important. Sugar and a pro-inflammatory diet are also going to compromise your immune system. Thank you. Thank you, yes. So antibiotics is another really big one, and it's very interesting because if you talk to people who have children who are really have disrupted health, whether it's that they've had some kind of brain damage or that they've had really bad gut health, a lot of times what happens is that they talk about how they've been on round after round of antibiotics, they've been giving their kids Tylenol after Tylenol, and then doing vaccines on top of that seems to be a double whammy. The other thing I wanted to put here, it goes with stress, is I'll do it this way, skin to skin, that we know that human beings thrive off of human touch. And that's actually something, so I can almost put it down as love. I'm not saying that any child in this room ever got sick because you didn't love them enough. Don't misunderstand me there. But just that actually, and I'm glad to see there's a man in the front here hugging his wife. We need that. We need that as children and we need that as adults. We need a lot of physical contact. We are social animals and that makes a big difference in our health. That's not something the doctor usually doesn't give you a prescription and say, go home and make love to your partner. But if doctors did, your health would get better. I would put that to you. I heard you say it and I didn't write it down. So we're going to say antibacterial soap, which is bad. Trauma? Who said that? Absolutely, thank you. Absolutely, and also, I mean, in terms of birth trauma and also children that are born by cesarean, we know have disrupted gut biomes and we have disrupted microbiomes, so that's another huge one. And absolutely. Okay, yes, okay. Exposure to too many EMFs. Okay, if any of you have questions about this or you want to go into it in more detail, because I have to move on so I can get to my very last point, we'll be talking about creating lasting health in my workshop tomorrow, and we'll talk about these things if you have questions, because I bet that you do. So here's the question. How do we make sure we have robust immune systems, freedom from chronic disease, and healthy brains? And that's where I want to bring in this man. So this is a very famous German philosopher named... Come on, you all knew mitochondria. You know that this is Hegel, right? And so Hegel is impossible to understand, and you can spend the rest of your life reading his books and trying to puzzle through them. But but I think we can learn a lot about the world and about science by reading philosophy. And one of the things that Hegel says in several of his books is that you have an idea. People usually talk about this as thesis, antithesis, synthesis, although Hegel didn't actually use those words. But you have an idea, a really strong idea, like the idea, that good hygiene is absolutely important. And then as a culture, as we come to understand things and as we look at things, people go to the antithesis, and then they say, no, no hygiene. So we have good hygiene, no hygiene, and then in the Hegelian model, then we have a synthesis. So we have a synthesis is not taking away the ideas that came before. It's nuancing them. It's finding a new paradigm for them. So we have this idea about antibiotics, that they're incredible and they're good and we should give them to everyone, and they saved so many lives in World War II when people were at the front. And then we realize, oh my God, we're not using them in an appropriate way. And so my friend's husband, refuses to get an antibiotic when he goes septic and almost dies, but absolutely won't take that antibiotic. And he managed to beat the disease, but it took him a year and a half to get his health back. Who knows if the antibiotic would have worked or not. But then, so we've got the idea, we've got the antithesis of the idea, and a synthesis would be something like, let's use the antibiotics when we really, really need them. Let's find a way to not use them if we don't, and to make sure that every use of them is appropriate and that we're keeping in mind all of the different issues that go along with them. And you could say the same about vaccines. But if that's too philosophy 101 for you, you could also just evoke the Margulis-Thomas principle. So this is Paul Thomas. He is a pediatrician in Portland. He's an addiction specialist and a pediatrician. He has 13,000 patients in his integrative pediatric practice. So integrative pediatrics, you probably all have heard that word before. It means you're taking the best of Western medicine and the best of alternative healing modalities. You're not rejecting anything, but you're synthesizing them together. And I met Dr. Thomas because he was talking to the Oregon State Legislature about the phenomenal data from his practice. He's been collecting data from his practice. He has made some very small evidence-based changes to the current CDC vaccine schedule, and what he's found is that he's been able to keep kids really healthy and have astounding results with not having the kind of chronic disease, including allergies and autism, that other practices are doing. After I heard him talk to the legislature, I wanted to know who the heck he was and what he was doing and investigate it further. And we ended up writing a book together. I'm going to give you the 2-second version of the paradigm that he uses for good health. This is not detailed. This is just this is like the cheat sheet version, and you all know even more about it than this. But so the idea is that you're not going to be hyper clean, and you're not going to spend all of your time indoors because we know we need to get outside. You're not going to overuse antibiotics, and this is for kids and adults. And then you're not going to use vaccines during pregnancy because we do not know that they are safe. And at this point, we have to evoke the precautionary principle. We have too many problems. Sick is the new well in America, and that is not okay. So we don't do any hepatitis B at birth, and then we have the judicious use of vaccines based on need, not advertising. So this is going to be an individual decision that you make based on the needs of your family, your genetic predispositions, and the possibility of exposures. And then to the yeses, yes, real, fresh, whole food diet. And it's crazy that I have to say this, but like one of the most radical things that you can do to take back your health is to eat food. I don't know exactly how we got there in America, but that really is where we are. And to feed your children food. So organic cheddar buddies is not food. And we'll talk about more about that tomorrow. Exactly, that's what I call them in one of my books. Those are edible food-like substances. Anything that comes in a package is not something you really want to put in your mouth. Yes to being outside in nature, to playing in the dirt. Yes to adequate vitamin D, preferably from sunlight. And yes to limiting your exposure to toxins. The key to all of this, I would put to you, is to put a person's health and their immune system at the center of any conversation and the center of a paradigm for good health, not any given medication, intervention, or vaccine. Thank you. That's it. I put up one more slide. I say one thing? Or?
Yes, absolutely.
I just wanted to let you all know how to find me. So you can find me at my website. You can find me on Facebook and on Twitter and on Pinterest and on LinkedIn. Oh my God. Except you shouldn't spend any time in front of digital devices because it's not good for your health. So if you'd rather find me in person, I'm going to be in Washington, D.C. on March 31st. I encourage you all to join us there. And there's also a new documentary coming out by Ty Bollinger, who did The Truth About Cancer, which is called The Truth About Vaccines. And you can also find me there. Thank you.
The activist.
Jennifer Margulis. Thank you, Jennifer. Great, that was wonderful.